There are scientific reasons why falling out of love or going through heartbreak is so detrimental. There's a whole lot that's happening from a neurological perspective and physiologically that makes the suffering so insufferable. When you fall in love, there's a huge surge of hormones like dopamine and oxytocin that make you feel like you're on top of the world. But when you fall out of love, those hormones plummet, while stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline skyrocket. This hormone roller coaster is similar to the experience that somebody has when they withdraw from drugs. The highs, well, they linger, and the lows, justifiable. And you feel compelled, almost compulsive, to seek out the next hit. What's more, the pain of a breakup has shown up on MRI scans as similar to the physical pain of a burn or a broken arm. Navigating the rise in our fight or flight response while weaning off the intoxicating chemicals of love can lead to emotionally driven behaviors that make the pain, well, linger. Because heartbreak is where your emotions have to readjust, unwillingly. And because many people don't want to adjust, they continue to find themselves stuck. They don't want to turn the page because they inevitably know who won't be in the next chapter. And I personally don't want that pain to linger any longer than it has to for you. So by the time you've watched this video, all the way to the end, not only will I break down and help you avoid the 13 worst behaviors that you could engage with post-breakup, but I'm also going to help you navigate through heartbreak so that the pain isn't so debilitating. Which brings me to my first point, contacting them. After a breakup, it's so tempting to reach out to your ex. Maybe you want closure, or maybe you just miss them. One night after a particularly rough day, you might feel the sensation of just reaching out to them for a moment of comfort. And it may even feel like the right thing to do in that moment because up to this point, maybe they were your place where you found comfort. But inevitably, this only makes things worse. What's interesting post-breakup is that your brain enters this space that's highly motivated, much like a starving person seeing food that is just out of reach. The grief that you go through pushes your brain to have to remap the continuum between time, space, and closeness or attachment. And much like going through the loss of a loved one, your mind still has to figure out how do we restructure this framework relative to this person who's actually not dead at all. And this takes a lot of time for a lot of people. And nevertheless, it's a total mindfuck. And in the modern world with constant access to your cellular device, it makes a transition from they're literally impossible to connect with to, oh, I can just shoot them a text message or a phone call. And these elements of communication and their name still being at the top of your text message list make it really difficult for a lot of people not to reach out, which only amplifies the motivation to go ahead and contact them. When we look at attachment style, people with the anxious attachment style have the highest proclivity to engage in behaviors like this. They rely on closeness and reassurance to validate themselves as people, especially if they highly prioritize relationships. And the breakup will trigger their deepest fear and wound of abandonment and inevitable rejection. And so they can grasp at this like straws, trying to keep their partner committed to revalidate and enforce their sense of self-worth. And a 2019 study shows that people with anxious attachment styles experience much higher levels of distress and have a harder time refraining from contacting their ex post-breakup as they seek to try to restore that lost sense of connection. And they will tend to engage in persistent efforts to reclaim the affection and attention from their ex-partner. And this inevitably prolongs the healing process. Now, another factor to consider if you want to understand yourself a little bit better is the personality traits. As we go throughout this video, I am going to touch on different thresholds of personality dimensions to help the math here for you. But neuroticism is a personality trait relative to the big five. And this personality dimension is characterized by a tendency towards anxiety, depression, and emotional instability. And because they experience these amplified states of negative emotion, and they have a difficulty in managing and navigating stressful situations, it makes it significantly more challenging for them to refrain from actually reaching out and contacting their ex. So the solution here is to give yourself a black and white concrete rule of no contact for at least a month. You need to use this time to focus on yourself and detach while the space, time, and connection pieces start to remap in your mind. And as a side note, if you need to delete their number and their text messages, please do so. And this brings me nicely into point number 2, trying to be friends immediately post-breakup. Now, I remember I've been in this situation where I went through a breakup and tried to tell myself that we could still be friends. But every time we talked, it hurt. Trying to pretend that the emotions that were there don't still linger, while also trying to navigate new boundaries when moments where we previously would have emotionally connected, we now don't. Pairing that with seeing them move on or even replace you while you still have emotions is a recipe for disaster. Trying to be friends, especially right away, keeps that wound fresh. It prevents you from actually detaching and moving on, as you're constantly reminded of what no longer is and what you lost. It's a new dynamic that constantly compares what is to what was. lows. And the ability to move through that while there's intense romantic emotions present is almost impossible, and typically unhealthy. The people who struggle the most with this from an attachment perspective are the anxious preoccupied attachment styles. This is a subset of the anxious attachment. The anxious preoccupied means that they're preoccupied with relationships primarily, and they often hyperfixate on their relationships even to the detriment of their own lives. And because of this characterization, I'm sure that you and Stevie Wonder can see how they are the most likely to struggle with this element, as they have a strong need for connection and struggle to separate friendship and romantic love. So the solution to all of this is taking a friendship hiatus. Allow yourself the time to heal and process while gaining emotional distance, and if you both genuinely want to be friends later down the road, you can. And it will also be a much healthier dynamic once you both have had the time to actually process and move on. Which brings me to my next point. Rebounding. Many men that I work with have a pattern, and this pattern tends to involve jumping from relationship to relationship with never processing what just happened and just trying to move on. To be fair, it feels really good at first, but soon they realize they're just trying to fill this void left empty by an ex, aiming to replace the presence of this person with a new face and a new name where they never actually took the time to feel this person out and see if they actually liked them. And they certainly didn't take the time to reflect on their past experiences to learn the lessons as to why that didn't work out in the first place and what role they could have played in the dynamic completely falling apart. And this new relationship that ends up being a rebound not only hurts themselves, but hurts the other person. Now, why do people do this? Well, rebounding can be a place where you don't actually have to deal with your feelings or emotions relative to the breakup. It's a convenient and easy distraction, but it also prevents you from fully processing the breakup and what you just went through, which down the road will lead to further emotional complications. Now, unlike the anxious, this is more of an avoidant attachment style matrix. In a study by Spielman in 2013, found that avoidant individuals are more likely to jump into relationships as rebounds. And this allows them to maintain their emotional distance and limit their levels of vulnerability. The unfortunate part of this is not only does it prevent them from building more self-awareness or actually processing the emotions, but it can lead to very toxic dynamics if played out down the road, as they focus on a here today, gone tomorrow type of mentality, only to be replaced with the next shiny object that grabs their attention, with zero regard for what is actually good for them. But that's an entirely different conversation. And if you're interested in the concept of narcissism, well, stick around to the end. So what is the point here? Well, we need to take time to actually process post-breakup, and replacing somebody with somebody else to help you move on is not actually helping you move on in a healthy way. If you can focus on self-discovery and healing, you will be a healed human being and also have the wherewithal to choose a better fit partner for you the next time that you actually enter a relationship, instead of focusing on needing a place for distraction and dopamine. Which brings me to my next point. Putting yourself down or blaming yourself entirely for the breakup that you just went through. It's common to think, I'm the problem, I'm not good enough, it was my fault. And these thoughts can haunt you and impact your self-esteem. This kind of self-deprecation can trap you in a cycle of negative thinking, making it significantly harder to actually move on and heal. Interestingly enough, when it comes to personality, research has found that people that are high in conscientiousness, while they have a strong sense of self-discipline and work ethic, while really honoring the idea of personal responsibility, tend to actually struggle the most post-breakup with turning the circumstances that happened inward. And this leads them to completely internalize the blame of the relationship falling apart and question their own sense of self-worth. And from an attachment perspective, I'm sure you can guess that the anxious attached person is going to be the one who also struggles the most with this. And a study by Simpson and Rhodes 2017 found this exact same thing. Individuals with an anxious attachment style are way more likely to internalize the fallout of a breakup and blame themselves. And this can lead to increased self-blame and depressive symptoms. They often believe that the breakup is a direct consequence of their own inadequacies, which perpetuates a cycle of negative self-perception and hinders their ability to move on. This is where you have to remind yourself that breakups happen for a million different reasons. And it never means ultimately that there's something wrong with you personally. Oftentimes, people break up because one person isn't the best fit for another person, and we all have the ability and sovereignty to choose that outcome. But just because somebody didn't choose you doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. And this brings me to my next point. Posting on social media pretending that everything is wonderful post-breakup simply to get your ex's attention. After a breakup, some people feel compelled to post all over social media to try to show how wonderful their life is now without their ex there. They post photos of themselves out and about traveling, having a great time, looking their best and engaging in new and exciting activities, all in the hopes that their ex will see this and it will make them feel some sense of regret or even jealousy. This may feel like so left field delulu, you're probably going, no one would ever do that. I promise you, people do this shit. And this behavior, while again seemingly harmless on some level, can be entirely counterproductive because it keeps you focused on your ex while also trying to paint this picture of a facade rather than doing the right thing and genuinely healing. And this habit can stem from this innate desire to regain control and validate your own sense of self-worth by eliciting a reaction from your ex. And a 2013 study found that people often use social media to help regulate their emotions post-breakup, and those with higher levels of neuroticism from a personality dimension and those who are higher in the anxious attachment department are the most likely to engage in this style of behavior. If I can give you any piece of advice relative to this, just stay off of social media. You need to focus on actually healing versus this false sense of healing. And certainly nobody in the world needs to validate your healing process. Only you need to do that work for yourself. Which brings me to my next interesting point relative to social media, and that would be stalking your ex. After a breakup, it can be incredibly tempting to check in and see what they're up to. You find yourself constantly checking their profile, scrutinizing their photos, and trying to decipher the meaning behind every unclear caption. But this behavior can turn into an obsession, and it keeps you emotionally tethered to your ex-partner. And this will ultimately prevent you from actually moving on. Stalking your ex online, or stalking anybody first and foremost, is wrong, but particularly continuing to spend a lot of mental and emotional energy keeping a pulse on what your ex is doing is only going to keep you in a toxic cycle of obsessing over them, and ultimately the time, space, and connection map isn't able to actually reestablish itself. And this keeps the wound fresh, making it significantly harder and prolonging the cycle of you actually moving on. Now, this is where personality dimensions get really interesting because conscientiousness actually plays a large part in this style of behavior. Remember, it's characterized by self-discipline, carefulness, and a desire for control. Think very type A people. And people high in conscientiousness actually struggle to let go. And this is because they feel a strong sense and urge to try to understand what the hell happened. And this type of behavior can also keep the door open and prevent them from experiencing any sense of closure. So the simple solution here is block and unfollow your ex. This removes the temptation or the unforeseen algorithm showing you your ex when you didn't need to see your ex doing some shit you didn't need to see them doing. Just prevents that from happening entirely. Take the proactive action and either mute or unfollow or simply delete any type of affiliation from you being able to see them, and them, likely, being able to see you. And this brings me to my next point, turning to food or alcohol to numb the pain. It's very common for people to seek comfort in food or alcohol, and you might find yourself reaching for junk food or pouring yourself another glass of wine to distract yourself from the emotional pain that you're experiencing post-breakup. While this may provide some sense of temporary relief, it often leads to long-term consequences for both your physical and mental health. Numbing your feelings in general, but specifically in this domain with food or alcohol, is going to prevent you from actually processing the way that you feel or the emotions that you continue to try to compartmentalize. And this creates a cycle where you continue to teach yourself to avoid dealing with pain, which can not only prolong your ability to suffer, but also reinforce behaviors that can become addictions or addictive styles or patterns of behavior that you can't ever let go of. And long term, this can lead to additional issues like weight gain, poor health, or even substance abuse. Now, when we think about people who have a higher proclivity to engage in this kind of behavior, this is a little interesting. But extroversion, as far as a personality trait, is characterized by being social, assertive, and high levels of activity. And people who are high in extroversion, in particular, often seek external stimulation to feel good. And after a breakup, if you're losing your support system or interactions with other people, well, what are you left to do? And these people tend to gravitate towards food and alcohol as a substitute for the interactions that they actually crave. And a 2000 study supports this. They found that individuals who are high in extroversion have a higher proclivity to engage in drinking behaviors, specifically in the domain of coping with stress and seeking some sense of social pleasure. And after a breakup, the changes in the social circle or the dynamics that they experienced previously can push them towards substance abuse to actually try to fill that void. And a 2013 study also shows that individuals with an avoidant attachment engage in very similar behaviors. Which brings me to my next point, romanticizing the relationship or only focusing on the good times. It's very easy for many people, and I know I'm guilty of this, post-breakup where you idolize the really high moments and the great times, or the laughs and the joy and the experiences that you had with this person. And you might find yourself replaying the best moments of all time over and over and over in your mind. And this may lead you to convince yourself that you two were perfect together and that you should have never broken up. And this can lead to a state of limerence, where you are obsessively infatuated with your ex. And this will end up with you clinging to an idolized version of your past history with them. And this ultimately can create a distorted view of what the actual relationship was. And this will also blind you to seeing the reasons why it ended in the first place. Limerence keeps you emotionally tethered to your ex, and this also prevents you from ever moving forward. And it's also a form of emotional escape, where you're trying to avoid dealing with the reality of the breakup that you're going through, because it's easier to cling to some sort of fantasy. Now, openness to experience is a personality dimension, characterized by imagination, creativity, and a preference for novelty and variety. And individuals who are high in openness are more likely to engage in a series of introspection and imaginative thinking, which can ultimately lead them to romanticizing the past and idealizing their ex. And their vivid imagination can make it incredibly difficult for them to actually let go of their ex-partner. And this, again, leading to limerence, will prevent them from actually living in the reality that the relationship is over. Which leads me to my next point of toxic behaviors. Number 9. Seeking revenge. After a breakup, feelings of hurt and betrayal can be incredibly overwhelming, and it's not uncommon to have thoughts of revenge, whether it's posting embarrassing stories, spreading rumors, or trying to make your ex jealous. I think we're all guilty of this at some point in our life. And while these actions may provide a brief sense of satisfaction, they often lead to more pain and complications down the road. Seeking revenge only keeps you tied to negative emotions. It prevents you from actually, again, moving on and healing. It's just keeping you stuck. It can also create a very toxic and obsessive cycle of behaviors that harm not only your ex, but yourself. When it comes to personality dimensions, people who are very low in agreeableness, which is characterized by trust, altruism, kindness, and affection, are way more prone to seeking revenge, and that objectively makes sense. They are way less likely to forgive and way more likely to hold grudges. And they have a proclivity towards antagonism and hostility, which causes them to act in ways that can be harmful and are usually counterproductive. Which brings me to point number 10. Isolating yourself. Many people have a tendency to withdraw from friends and family post-breakup. It kind of feels natural to just want to retreat from the entire world. You might feel ashamed, embarrassed, or simply too sad to face other people. So you isolate yourself while thinking that just being alone will be the thing that helps you heal. But instead of finding solace, you find yourself sinking deeper into loneliness and despair. What a lot of people don't understand is that isolation can continue to amplify feelings of depression and pain. And this makes it significantly harder to actually recover post-breakup. Social support in any domain is really critical for any element of healing. It provides emotional comfort, perspective, and a sense of belonging, which we all need. And isolating yourself deprives you of those benefits and will inevitably prolong the emotional pain that you're experiencing. Now, introversion is a personality dimension that is characterized by a preference for solitude and introspection, and most of these people have very limited social interactions, while introverts tend to recharge by spending time alone. Excessive isolation to any human being can be incredibly detrimental, and individuals with an avoidant attachment style are particularly prone to engaging in this type of behavior. They tend to suppress their emotions and avoid relying on anybody else for any semblance of support. They tend to also have a core belief that independence and self-reliance are the best ways to cope with pain. Which leads me to my next point, looking at old text and photos of you two. It's tempting to scroll through old text messages and photos, reminiscing on the good times and trying to recapture the feelings of when things were better. Each message, each picture can pull you back into the past, making it harder to accept the reality of the breakup that you just went through. This obviously will have a pattern and a proclivity to keep you stuck and limit your ability to actually move on. It can also create a false sense of hope while simultaneously prolonging the pain that you're experiencing, as you're constantly reminded of what you've lost, rather than focusing on healing and creating new experiences for yourself. Now, when it comes to personality dimensions, those who are high in conscientiousness have a higher proclivity to engage in this type of behavior. They tend to engage in things like rumination and overanalyzing every little thing. And this proclivity can lead to repeatedly revisiting old memories and digging into the details of why everything happened the way that it did, which inevitably makes it harder to move on. And this brings me to my next point, having a tendency to want to stay in their social circle. After a breakup, it might seem like a good idea to try to stay connected with the common friends and family members that you once had a relationship with. You think that it will keep you close to your ex and maybe make the transition easier. However, constantly interacting with their family and or friends makes it significantly more difficult. This keeps you in a container in an environment that is familiar to your past and again prevents the remapping of time, space, and connection. This also prevents you from creating a new identity, which would move you forward into progressing with your life. And this part is actually really crucial for your overall emotional recovery. It not only makes the detachment part of moving on incredibly difficult, but it puts the people who are in the middle of you two in a very uncomfortable position. Now, if you're somebody who's high in agreeableness and you had friends that were common with your ex, it may be really difficult for you and you might feel like a bad person for setting a boundary with these people that you no longer need to interact with. What you have to recognize is that your boundaries are your responsibility and it's not up to you to suffer in order to appease other people. And most importantly, the people that genuinely care about you are going to want you to heal. And most people will understand, hey, unfortunately, I need to draw a boundary here because it's not good for me mentally or emotionally to continue to engage with you. And ultimately for you, if you're somebody who's more like this, you also need to focus on creating new social circles for yourself. And no, setting a boundary with these people doesn't make you a bad person. Which brings me to my last and final point, which again might sound a little bit insane, but nevertheless, this happens. Going to places you know your ex will be. After a breakup, many people find themselves justifying why they need to go to a place where they know that their ex-partner will be. Whether it's a favorite cafe, a mutual friend's party, a gym, the idea is that you might accidentally run into them. And this could spark up a conversation or even potentially reignite that flame of the relationship. However, this type of behavior only amplifies negative emotions long term and can make you look kind of silly. This inevitably just keeps that wound open, like pouring salt on it over time, and prolongs the emotional attachment and fixation on that relationship in the first place. This can also lead to really awkward and somewhat painful encounters, especially if they've already moved on. And it will keep you in this cycle of a false sense of hope. So now that we've discussed all the things that we don't want to do, let's talk about positive steps that you can take, though some of these might be painful. Number one, actually allow yourself to go through the grief cycle. You need to allow yourself to experience all of the stages of grief. This includes denial, sadness, anger, and finally, acceptance. Allowing yourself to feel all of the emotions in their entirety is essential for your ability to actually heal and move on. Crying, getting angry, and eventually accepting the breakup for what it is are all natural parts of the process of moving on. And suppressing your emotions is only going to prolong the pain or drive behaviors that not only set yourself up to feel pain, but other people as a piece of your collateral damage. Each stage of the grief cycle serves a purpose in the healing process. While denial might help you survive the initial shock of the situation, anger will give you a sense of structure. Bargaining will keep your sense of hope alive, and depression may be a necessary step to confront the deep sorrow of the heartbreak that you're experiencing, while ultimately this will move you to acceptance, which allows you to move forward. Which means I need you to do one very important thing, and that is give yourself permission to actually feel your feelings. It's okay to cry, scream, seek out a friend, vent, or give yourself a mental and emotional health day. It's okay to acknowledge your feelings and also let them pass naturally. And if you're a man who's been taught to suppress your emotions, yes, there are women like this too, but particularly men, I just want you to know it doesn't make you weak to feel what you need to feel. Journaling, talking to a friend, or even seeking somebody to work with to help you process everything in a safe container can be the catalyst that helps you move forward. The next thing that I want to encourage you to do is actually identify some patterns. The hardest thing about changing or acknowledging pain is your role in creating the pain that happened. It's important to reflect on your breakup that you went through and see if it's a part of a pattern in your underlying relationship choices. If you can be honest with yourself without judgment, because we all have a proclivity to self-select things that are familiar, not necessarily good. You may see things like you choosing partners who are consistently emotionally unavailable. And this acknowledgement and acceptance can help you make better decisions around selecting a partner in the future. And it also helps you see what you can improve about yourself. This is also a really important time where you'll find insight on the differences between what you want and what you actually need. Which brings me perfectly to my next point, which is determining what it is that you want versus what it is you actually need. You need to be able to accept the fact that we all have needs, and needs don't make you a burden, they don't make you needy, they make you human. And you want to find a partner who can help you achieve those needs. and is happy to actually meet them. Because if you've ever been with somebody who it felt like you had to beg for 5 minutes of attention or to be kind to you or to do anything for you or the relationship, that is insufferable. And I say that as somebody who's been there. Instead, we can sit down and say, my needs are valid. They are also important, and the right person will want to fill those needs for me, just as I will want to fill their needs for them. And I also want to point out that this can be a non-negotiable or a red line in a relationship. If you're somebody who needs somebody who can commit and doesn't entertain things outside of the relationship that you've committed to, stick to that boundary. That is a need that you have. I personally don't believe in the open relationship atmosphere. That's not for me to tell you you can't do that. You can do whatever you want to do, and I'm not judging you. But as a person, I know that mentally and emotionally, I couldn't deal with that. And going through this process will also help you align and set a clear vision of what your expectations are, both from your future partner and from yourself. And this will ensure that your future relationships are healthier in the dynamic between you two and significantly more satisfying. The last thing and the most important thing that I feel like I need to speak on here is the fact that there is no timeline for your healing. A lot of people will say, just move on, you should just get over it, it's not that big of a deal, everybody goes through heartbreak. Yeah, and kiss my ass, because I'm hurting right now, I don't need your word salad. Your journey is your own. You can run the race at your own pace, and there's no deadline for you to hit these arbitrary goals of meeting a man, buying a house, getting engaged, getting married. While there is some pressure around having children if that's what you want to have, that does not mean that you should settle for a relationship that is toxic, empty, or unfulfilling. So that brings me to the end of this video. These were the 13 worst behaviors that you could engage in post-breakup. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to understand how narcissists actually think, function, and choose partners, then click this video and I'll see you there. If not, fuck off. Bye.